Alright, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back. It's me, Addy, again, and I hope you guys are doing alright. This is going to be the first episode of a new series of videos I'm planning on making over here on my YouTube channel, where I go in and review all of the games that I've played thus far over on Twitch. I've been having a lot of fun just making these short review videos on things like God of War, FF7 Remake Intergrade, and the Death Stranding novels, and so I figured why not make more of these videos, right? And now's a better time than any, given how over the next couple of days, and weeks possibly, I won't be getting a lot of time to stream, so this would be a great opportunity for me to fill the void with some YouTube content. So with that said, today we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core, one of my all-time favorite games. This is both the prequel to Final Fantasy VII and served as my gateway into what would become my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy VII. Now, Crisis Core was one of the first games I ever streamed on Twitch back in February of 2020. And this was part of a series I was doing at the time to play all of the games in the compilation of Final Fantasy VII leading up to the release of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which came out in April of that year. So this was a great way to celebrate the upcoming release of the remake at the time, and I have very fond memories of it. This was definitely one of the best series I've done on my channel. One of the first series I ever did besides, I think, Death Stranding and Star Wars, which are the two games I played before Crisis Core. So yeah, definitely nostalgic times for sure. We've talked a lot about Crisis Core and Final Fantasy VII for that matter before on my channel, and you can actually check out the 40-minute video I made on why Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game of all time if you want the full picture. But to recap, Crisis Core is a game that means a great deal to me personally. It was one of the first games, if not the first game, that I ever completed by myself without the help of my brother, and I think I was around 7 years old when the game came out. Yeah, I think this was around 2007, and that's when I played it. And it was also the first game that introduced me to the power of narrative and storytelling in video games. Zack Fair, the main protagonist of the game, is the first fictional character I ever connected with and really cared about. And ultimately, he is what defines Crisis Core. And even after all these years, I can confidently say that I feel like both his character and the journey that he embarks on are written beautifully. I was crying by the end of the game back then, and goddamn, just thinking about it makes me want to cry now. So yeah, I have to say that Zack will probably go down as probably my favorite video game character ever, next to Cloud himself, of course. He is undeniably the greatest strength of Crisis Core. On top of all this, one of the other aspects of the game that I have very fond memories of as a child, and even when I streamed this game last year, was the combat. The combat was incredibly impressive when you consider that the game was released on the PSP, Sony's handheld giant of the 2000s. Despite the hardware limitations of the system, Square Enix managed to make full use of it and deliver a quality storytelling and gameplay experience with Crisis Core. And in spite of its lack of a traditional party-based system, Crisis Core's combat still managed to be fun as hell even with Zack as its solo character. He was satisfying to control, and the array of his abilities at his disposal were so fun to use. And I love how the game implemented the materia or magic system of Final Fantasy VII. In Crisis Core, a unique spin was given to the system with things like materia fusion, where you can combine materia to create more powerful variants of it, and much, much more. And one of the other things that I really loved about this experience was the music. One of my favorite parts about Final Fantasy VII, not just the original, but the compilation in general, is its music. There might be some aspects of the compilation here and there that aren't perfect, but my god, is the music just spot on, 10 out of 10 every single time, and really gets me feeling emotional always. It's so good. And a lot of that I attribute to Nobuo Uematsu. And even though the score here in Crisis Core wasn't composed by the legendary Nobuo Uematsu this time around, the game still manages to have some of the most memorable and kick-ass music tracks, all directed by a gentleman of the name of Takeharu Ishimoto. There's also a lot to like about the characters in this game. It's worth mentioning that so many of the side characters that we know and love from the original FF7, such as Cloud and Sephiroth, were expanded upon and given way more layers. I especially love how this game really humanized Sephiroth before his descent into villainy. God, there's just so much I love about this game. But even with all of the things that make me love Crisis Core so much, it still is a game with some very clear flaws, all of which are embedded within the facets that I just described as loving. And let's start with the combat. Despite having a very addictive combat system, the DMW, or Digital Mindwave, aka spinning wheel mechanic, during combat can prove to be quite a hassle. You see, as much as I think it's a neat concept to relegate non-existent party members to Crisis Core's DMW, which allows Zack to unleash powerful limit breaks by imagining his friends during combat, I think that the RNG element of it was a major annoyance. And it's enough to make me realize that the original 1997's turn-based combat systems aged far better than this. Any elements of heavy randomization in a video game, no matter how fun the combat is on a base level, is bound to make it not that great. And Crisis Core is a very good example of that. The combat here is fun, but it's just tapered back a little bit and made not that fun by the DMW system. Another element of the game that I didn't quite like within an otherwise fantastic aspect of it were some of the new characters that the game introduced. Characters like Angeal and Genesis, who never existed within the FF7 continuity prior to Crisis Core, felt forced and shoehorned in. Angeal I felt was okay, and I don't dislike him as much as a lot of other FF7 fans do, but Genesis was, oh my god, Genesis was insufferable, man. And a big reason for that is because his design and attitudes are based around a real-life celebrity. And inevitably, this led to him feeling extremely out of place in the game, and at times very annoying. I just wasn't a fan of how he was written into the game and how he meddled with major plot points that were so good in the original Final Fantasy VII and kind of took the spotlight in not the best way possible. But it's not all bad, right? There are some characters introduced here who are cool, and I would like to see return in future installments of the remake. Like Cissney, for example, and maybe some of the characters who I didn't think were that great, such as Genesis, could be reintroduced as well. I think that would be really cool, right? Given how we've seen that the remake has this wonderful capability of writing in characters very, very well. The character writing in the remake is very good, and it's proven to have the ability to take both existing and new characters and make them likable and interesting, as seen in FF7 Remake, both the base game and intermission. But yeah, overall, I would say that the handling of Crisis Core's new characters was a little weak. It was neat on paper, but poor in execution. One final part of the game worth mentioning that I don't want to say I loved, but I don't want to say I hated either, and I guess maybe I could say I was a little bit iffy on this, were the side quests. While fun and addicting, given all the cool new materia and gear that Zack could unlock, they did become repetitive very quickly. Many of the same levels would be recycled, so the whole thing just felt like a chore, but I can kind of understand that, right? This is more of a minor gripe, because I do get that ultimately Square were trying their best with the limitations of the PSP. And in the grand scheme of things, Crisis Core was a phenomenal PSP game, given what they managed to pull off with the console in the end. So here's the thing, right? The reason I'm mentioning all of these gripes is not just for the sake of reviewing the game. You see, when you play, watch, or read something you really like when you're very young, it's almost impossible to spot any of its flaws since your ability to critically think hasn't fully developed yet. At least that was the case with me. And so when I played Crisis Core when I was a child, I never saw all of these flaws within the aspects of the game I absolutely adored. I thought everything about the game, like the characters, the combat, the side quests, and more, were masterful. The game was the coolest thing ever to me. And in my heart, it still is. I'll never forget how happy this game made me, and I genuinely do still think that its main character is one of the best developed characters in video games, and that this remains the strongest aspect of the game. Now that I am older and had the chance to play this game not long ago on Twitch, I do absolutely see the cracks that I mentioned with this game. And so for that reason, despite Crisis Core being an absolute 10 out of 10 in my heart, I would probably give it around a 7 if I were to examine it critically. Saying this makes me want to go back to my Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade review and give it more of an 8 because we did discuss a couple of the flaws that that game had, but ultimately I did give it a 10 because the game just meant so much to me personally. So I feel like going forward in these reviews, I want to make the distinction between how I see a game critically versus how I see it personally, how I'd rate it critically versus how I'd rate it personally, that is. In the end, you know how I liken Crisis Core? It's to my childhood itself. I know that growing up was full of ups and downs, but looking back at the big picture, I love my childhood dearly. In the same way, Crisis Core, despite its ups and downs, is a beautiful game. If you found yourself liking Final Fantasy VII and want to explore its universe and characters further, then look no further than an emulator to get you up and running with this classic. And yeah, that's it for this short review video today, guys. I do hope to see you again in day 2 of our let's review most, if not all, the games I've streamed in the past on Twitch, because this was really, really fun, and it's been really fun so far doing a bunch of other review videos too, so hell yeah, let's go. But until the next one, guys, as always, I want you guys to have a fantastic one, and never forget to keep on keeping on. Thanks, guys.